Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today, this evening, depending on where you are. We really appreciate you being with us. And just fighting with my own technical difficulties here, which really aren't that bad, but anyway, a couple of things we want to make sure you're aware of is to please put your chat on if you don't have it on already. We're gonna love to hear from you via chat and hear all the snaps via chat. And we'll be doing a Q&A a little later in the program, and that will be where you'll be able to put your questions, and we'll appreciate you taking the time to do that. Okay, so my name is Mari, and I am the publicity manager for the University of Arizona Press. On behalf of the press, I want to thank Valerie Martínez and Rigoberto Gonzaléz for generously sharing their time with us tonight. We really appreciate it and understand that they've got some other wonderful things going on right now. So we appreciate their sharing their time with us, especially on a Wednesday evening. But for us, poetry, we're always available for poetry, and are really excited to share Valerie's book with you. The University of Arizona Press is a premier publisher of academic, regional, and literary works in the state of Arizona. And we publish about 1,600 books or 55 books annually, and have more than 1,600 books in print, scholarly titles, as well as Latinx studies, space sciences, and of course our award-winning fiction and poetry series Sun Tracks and Camino del Sol, of which Count is a part of. It's an honor to introduce Rigoberto Gonzaléz. He is editor of our Camino del Sol series and is the author of 18 books of poetry and prose. His awards include the Guggenheim, NEA, and NYFA, and the USA Rollon Fellowships, among many others. We have been excited since he joined us as the Camino del Sol editor, and happy that he could be part of this event with Valerie. Valerie, hold on for just a moment, getting a message from one of our participants. Okay, and I look forward, I'm introducing Rigo, passing the baton to him, and appreciate you both being with us today.
I'll take it from here.
Yep.
Okay.
All yours. Sorry.
Sorry about that. All right. Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you are on the map. I am chiming in from New Jersey, my new home here for the past 2 years, after being 23 years a New Yorker. It is a wonderful occasion to be here tonight to introduce and to see and hear Valerie Martínez, whose beautiful book Count is going to be the second in the series as I've been editing the Camino del Sol. And, you know, when this book first came to my attention, I knew I was going to read it closely because I was a huge fan of Valerie's previous book, Each and Her, which is also a Camino del Sol title. And one thing I've always respected about Valerie was not only the way that she's able to carefully craft the material, but also do right by the material that she's investing time in. In Each and Her, the dealing with the femicides and the border, and in this wonderful book, Count, having to do with climate change, but many other things, and we're going to discuss that. So I'm going to formally provide an introduction to Valerie. We're going to hear her read, and then we're going to have a conversation about the book. So Valerie Martínez is the author of 6 books of poetry. Her work has been awarded the Larry Levis Prize, a Greenwald Grant from the Academy of American Poets, and the Arizona Book Award, and received nominations for the Pulitzer Prize, William Carlos Williams Award, National Book Critics Circle Award, Penn Open Book Award, and the Ron Ridenhour Prize, as well as honorable mentions in the 2011 International Latino Book Awards. She was the Poet Laureate of Santa Fe, New Mexico from 2008 to 2010. Her new book, Count, is a powerful book-length poem that reckons with the heartbreaking reality of climate change. 43 sections of myth gathering, flora and fauna, accounts of climate devastation, personal narratives, witnessing, references to works of eco art, and evocations of children unfold over the course of the book, creating a deeply nuanced image of the current climate crisis. Central to this vital work of ecopoetry is the idea of counting down to the extinction of the species, counting the wonders of the natural world, counting our way back to the balance that is required to save ourselves from climate destruction. So without further ado, Valerie Martínez.
Thank you so much, Rigoberto, and thank you everyone at the University of Arizona Press. I also want to thank Basha Erland, whose image is on the front of the book. If you don't know the work of Basha Erland, an amazing eco artist, please look her up on the web. That image is one of her ice books or hydrolibros that she set sail all over the world. They helped to reseed the riverbanks. And everybody who wrote a blurb on the book, and I see that Brenda Cardenas is here, who wrote a blurb, thank you so much, and everyone else. And I'm so happy to be here and glad that all of you are here. So I'm just going to read something from the first part of the book. Again, this is a book-length poem in 43 sections. And so I'm just going to start at the beginning and read several sections. I'll read the number of the section before each one, and then we'll talk a little bit about it. I should also say that this book is dedicated to all the children in my life. They're listed at the beginning of the book, all my nieces and nephews, and the strange vision of a girl that came to me. That was one of the things that sparked this book, Unknown Girl, who appears in this first section. 1. Saturday afternoon with Serafina in the back seat, tethered to iPhone, singing somewhere between off-key and tune, we approach the girl on the median. A handwritten sign, car wash, you know you want one. Eyelet top, short shorts, black bra peeking through, long line of cars, men folded over windows, flipping U-turns into a parking lot, where the football team kicks back in lawn chairs, where more girls in cutoffs and bikini tops soap up sedans, pickups, and the water sliding off hubcaps, pooling on asphalt, pouring endlessly into storm drains. I watch Fina, almost 13, turn her head till her neck can no longer twist, and I am dumbstruck for once. Male gaze, division of labor, critical drought. She eyes me expectant. Instead, I go deep in, remember the Thornycroft giraffe strangely isolated from the herd, bending to her dead calf, splaying, standing, splaying again. I say nothing. 2. Near the La Luz trailhead, 7,032 feet, we sidestep a thicket, Cylindropuntia imbricata. Drought tolerant, difficult to kill, stippled with bees and magenta blooms, the spaces it fills in the shadows of colossal boulders. We hike up southeast, watch a lip of brown creep up the foothills, inch by inch, below which the green world disappears. It's hard not to think akin, continuous, north and south, Greenland with its radical ice melt, the advance of the Atacama Desert. When I hear it, a brimming, a lapping, a sequence of little roars. 3. Let us go now, you and I, to the water, to the girl who stands alone at the sea. The ocean is the color of milk and green-gray leaves. It's cold, overcast. I can see the goosebumps on her legs. She happens to wear white. She must be 7 or 8. The girl goes to the water. I see her during the day, at night, when looking straight on in that highway drive hypnotic state. She reminds me of my nieces, the infants they were, the plastic tubs and soapy water, the sounds they made, gurgling while they were bathed. 4. Once upon a time, the ground upon which we stand was merely a skin over the ocean. The god Pinyon poked it and flooded the land. Only 2 survived, a woman and a man sealed inside a ship of pulai wood. As the waters receded, they nibbled their way outside, dropped into a field of rhododendrons. Alone, they bemoaned the absence of children. Later, the woman gave birth from the flesh of her calves, from which we are all descended. 5. Water-stressed, the ice plant closes its stomata in daylight, curbing evapotranspiration, opens them at night to absorb more carbon dioxide. Phenotypic plasticity is the ability of an organism to adapt to a rapidly changing environment. Lettuce produces more phytochemicals. The intertidal crab remakes its gills. Arabidopsis undergoes dramatic transcriptomic reprogramming. And so I walk away euphoric from the Lomas Tramway Public Library, unzip my jacket in the unseasonably hot October wind, imagining mesembryanthemum at the end of a long hallucinogenic twilight, waking brightly into morning. 6. Each month for 2 years, I let Dr. Samanon sink me deep into hypnosis. Her 19, 18, 17, 16, like the downward count at the start of old movies. And in there, I saw a series of creatures: tadpole, she-elephant, hippo, the double-humped camel inside which my infant self curled up peacefully. I'd leave her office without the capacity for speech, as if language were no longer inherent, as if the slow upward count lifting me back into consciousness was incomplete, and I lingered in some faro place where the outline of my body blurred and the space between me and my creatures no longer existed. 7. On the asphalt path at Shark Valley, the Tarzan screech of a limpkin knocks me back into midday, bicycling through muggy air. And I resume the alligator count: 28, 29, 30, 31, basking at pathside or half submerged in a slope. The year I bounced between high desert and wetlands, deeply incised riverbeds, and this 15-mile loop seeming to float on water. I swerve from the carapace of an apple snail, Pomacaya caniculata, see a dozen more scattered on sawgrass, sedge sitting precariously atop a vanishing layer of Everglades peat. I am far from home here, where water hovers in all its forms, a behemoth pulsing through me like breath and breath, like Samoan octopus, children, fire, and water locked in an epic battle, triggering the rise of a boundless sea. Yet another tale of the deluge, wiping the slate clean. 8. In the 60s, in the backyard of the San Ildefonso house, we ran the spigot for hours, full blast, let go the garden hose to watch it corkscrew and dance, tried to catch it, tame it, pin it under our soaked shoes. High desert water ran wild those hot summers, sheen on the shoulders, cool shine, twisting our soaked heads, letting the drops fly. Bill Viola's slow motion video, The Raft, begins simply. Strangers wait for a bus or train, yawning, checking the time. Water blasts into the frame right and left, leaden tsunami, fog, impenetrable cloud. All are taken down. The water recedes and stops, interminably drips from hems, shirt cuffs, torpid split ends. They labor into consciousness, lift themselves up, and only then can they reach out, pull each other up, telling me something about extremity, something I don't want to know. 9. Hiking into Pinyon, the mountain fades from green to yellow to caramel brown. 100 million dead trees in the Southwest alone. The bark beetle thrives on drought, devours the phlegm, starves the scaly trunks. Just one spark, campfire, cigarette, and a sea of brittle trees bursts wildly into flames. In Giza, 1250 BC, the dung beetle seemed to emerge spontaneously from its burrow, spurred by a mysterious force, and so was worshipped as Khepra, he who comes forth, pushing the sun faster on its course. The Egyptians placed gold scarabs over the hearts of the mummified, inscribed with a spell from the Book of the Dead. Make no failure in respect of me before the master of balance.
Thank you so much. That's quite beautiful. You know, when I first read your manuscript, I marveled at because I think a sequence poem, one of the risks of a sequence poem is that some of the poems may kind of fade in the company of some of the stronger ones. But let me tell you, you managed to keep up that integrity of each poem, so that they were never in competition. They never drowned out another. They're always in collaboration, and that's why the sequence is successful. So it's beautiful, beautiful thing. Lovely writing. Before we even proceed with specific questions, I wanted to maybe for the viewers here to unwrap a little bit what we mean by ecopoetry, because we've always heard nature poetry, environmental, but what does it really mean when we move into ecopoetry? And I think that there's some great definitions, online, but the one that I found that was more interesting, I think more appropriate to what you're doing, is the following. It says, ecopoetry is focused on humanity's interrelationship with the natural world in such a way that implies responsibility, engagement, and a striving for ecological integrity. Right? And then ecopoetry is also about the desire for creating change. It is urgent, it aims to unsettle, it has a desire to use a warning, to issue a warning of some kind. And indeed, and I wanted to ask you about that, because when I reading your book, you're like, okay, well, there's so many arresting images there that show us our impending doom, right? And yet your language is so lovely, and so I was wondering for you, how did you navigate the tension between just the gravity, of the subject matter, but also sort of preserving the beauty of the language, and also the wonderful images that you have throughout? How did you kind of reconcile those two as a writer?
Yeah, that's a great question. And one of the things is that I tell people that the book is full of warnings and omens, so to speak, but it's also a love poem, and it's a love poem to flora and fauna, because I think that when we marvel at the creatures and the plants of this planet, it brings us closer to them. And so the peril for their survival and these examples of how they're trying to survive those need to coexist in us, this urgency, as well as this heart love for the planet, because in the current rhetoric around everything in this country, the very divisive rhetoric about everything, we tend to lose the sense of what is dear to us. And I think for me, people are moved to action more, in my experience, when they feel that connection at the very least, or even love for whatever it is, another human being, but certainly for the flora and fauna in the book. And so I think for me, those things coexist. The same thing was true with Each and Her, my previous book, which has sort of brutal facts about the femicide, the murders of women around Juarez. At the same time, it's a love poem for those women. And so these two books are the same in that sense. And so in terms of writing the book, there's so many threads, right? So I always tell people, if you're looking for something linear, turn away from my work. It's because it's a weaving, this poem. And so there's all these stitches that keep coming up in the poem, works of art about water, flora and fauna, counting, my nieces and nephews. And so the way I had to balance all of those, including the distress with the love, is by just kind of always watching when those stitches come up, so that the whole thing is a sort of integrated, which is a part of the approach to climate destruction, which is actually our destruction. The planet will go on, we'll have done our damage, but we won't be here. And so I think that kind of interweaving is something I think we need to manage in ourselves in order to approach any kind of impending disaster. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And it's funny, originally you say that the planet's going to move on. The planet will still be here, but we will not, because we will have destroyed ourselves, right? And I think that's one thing. I actually heard that phrased that way like a couple of days ago. Even though we know this, but when it was phrased so explicitly that way, I was a little bit stunned. And because this poet said, when we write these, we use our language because we're communicating with other people. So we don't need to tell the planet anything. If anything, we have to listen to what the planet is telling us. Hence, all these catastrophes and disasters. It's like, this is what we did, right? And so the planet is gonna be here long after we're gone. But that's the thing, is like we have the power to ensure our longevity, as a human species on this planet. And yet everything around us is conspiring to kind of cut that existence short. And what a sad ending that would be, right? After all that everybody has done to create civilizations and cultures and languages, to just let it go. And so I think that there's a failure of the imagination, I think, currently, that people are still, and by people I also mean like corporations, and because we're all complicit in this, that we're not thinking of the world after our lifetimes. We're thinking that's it, the world ends, because really the world ends when each of us dies. Our world ends, but the world moves on, and what do we leave behind? Which is why another reason that I really appreciated your book was the presence of children.
Everywhere in the book, all 8 of my nieces and nephew, and I just have a grandnephew that was born the other day, so he didn't make it in, but they're all there too, and there are anecdotes about all of them, because that is our legacy, right? Is what we leave to our children and their children. So if the urgency of this connection that we should have to flora and fauna, then the book says, well, we have a connection to the children in our lives. And people will sometimes, I think one of the questions on the press website was, what might be the responsibility of young people? And I'm quick to say, this is our responsibility. I think they're going to have to deal with it, young people. They're going to have to live it, but it is our responsibility, I think, for those of us who are older, because we helped to create this, and we need to be working hard as we sort of get closer to the end of our lives. Let us do the bulk of that work. We also tend to have more resources than they do. My nieces and nephews are, all out of college, most of them, and trying to make it in the world. And so I want them to be able, there's a lot of activists. I said that in my comments. and they're really important. But I feel the responsibility for those of us that are older to address this, not just in a book of poetry, but in all of my actions and, you know, who I'm giving money to and all of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think it's so easy now to say, well, the next generation will do better than we did. And I used to say that too. But then I thought, well, wait a minute, isn't that sort of excusing myself from doing anything while I'm still around? You know, well, I'll just wait for the next generation. I think that also the passing the buck has been one of the ways in which we have failed ourselves too. And sort of we have to continually participate with not only those who imagined before us, right, but those that will imagine after us. So we have to be part of that, you know, part of that conversation, right? And definitely part of that activism. You know, I know that activism has a very dangerous connotation. And I'm thinking, well, I think we should embrace that because this is a very dangerous situation that we're in, you know, with the planet. Absolutely.
And there's so many things we can do as artists and writers, right? We can write about it. You can, if you know, you can do things in your own home. You can give money to causes. You can advocate and lobby, all of those things, and everybody can be comfortable with what they're comfortable. But I think everybody needs to do something. And this book has a lot about that. You know, there's a section that, you know, ends with a reference to Wako in Hawaii, where, you know, are we waving our hands in distress, you know? So we should be waving our hands and doing things because we're at a critical point right now in this fight to save ourselves, right, and to save the parts of the planet that we are damaging seriously in this moment. So read about these creatures, you know, outside of my book, and how they're trying to adapt. I mean, lettuce is trying to adapt. Lettuce. So, you know, in your own backyard.
Yeah, and also you make so many references to that open up avenues of exploration into climate change, information, climate change, other kinds of activities, right? And one example was that the documentary about the ice, was it Chasing Ice?
Yes.
Like seriously, you know, there's so much out there that we sometimes miss it, even though it's like an award-winning documentary, but many people just may have missed it because it's a documentary, first of all. And second of all, it's sort of its platform. I think it was, I can't remember where it was screened, but anyway, but when I saw that, I checked it out. You know, well, I gotta Google this, Chasing Ice, and all of a sudden, like, okay, wait, this is what this book is also doing. You know, not that you set out to plant these, but they were certainly fluid in the journey of the book. But I thought, well, this is also what this book can do. And I was remembering another response to the role of ecopoetry, which was, well, you know, can poetry do enough? Well, I know poetry is going to do what it's going to do. We have to do more because we have more resources, we have more abilities. But let's not underestimate poetry, because poetry does help people imagine and see and envision, you know, not only what is happening now, but what could happen later. Right? I think your book.
Yes, I agree. And I'm experimenting with this book. I think what I've been saying about, I'm trying to figure out how much a poem can manage, because this book it has lyric fragments, but it has a lot of information. And so it might not seem poetic to, you know, like poetry in certain sections, but for me it is, because I'm trying to experiment with that. Like, how much can a poem do? You know, in the ways we think about poetry with language and music. I hope that people hear the music in the poem as I read it and as you read it. But I'm also just really interested, you know, I turned 60 this year, and, you know, I've been writing since I was 13 years old, and I have several books under my belt. And every time a new book starts happening, I think that's what's happening subconsciously, is like, how much of what I care about, how much of what I dream, how much of what is dear to me, how much of what appalls me, you know, can enter the poem and still be called a poem. And so I'm, you know, it's hard, these books. I tell people after Each and Her, which is a book length poem, I said I would never do that again. I would never write a book length poem. I got lost in the reorganization of that book, which has 72 sections. I had all the papers on the floor and I lost it. I lost for a while. You know, I was supposed to revise it to turn it back to the press. And I thought, I can't do it. I can't put it all back together. And I did the same thing with this one that made me crazy as a poet. But there's something about the poem being able to do a lot of work that I'm really interested in. But I'm not going to do it again.
Not gonna do it again? Well, well, why not? I mean, one thing that maybe you can take with you in the next project, because I really love this in the book, and I think it kind of gives us a glimpse into how you managed to do what you just said, which is all these information, but all these different avenues into a single poem, especially the single couplets here. I noticed a lot of movements, a lot of leaps. There were time leaps. There were leaps on the map. There were leaps of associations, and I think that's one of the reasons why I felt I was being kept awake every single step, because all of a sudden I'm in one place, and next thing you know, I'm in this other place or this other discipline. At one point we're in a memory of the beach, and all of a sudden we're in another beach, in a film in another country. So I think that's what's really the key to not only managing the material in the poem, but also giving the reader, this ability and agility to move timelines and spaces and even associations, because these things become triggers that remind us of other things, right? So maybe you can speak a little bit about, was that something that you worked on, or was that something that came organically in the writing of it?
Well, the collage form is something that I just do. I mean, if you even look at my work in my early books, they are associative. I really love writers who do the narrative poetry. I mean, I admire them so much. I just don't seem to imagine that way. And one thing is just my personality is I digress a lot. Ask anybody in this room who knows me. If you ask me a question, I'll spin out and go to a lot of places. And I used to think that wasn't the way to think. But then long ago, as a young feminist, I read the work of the French feminist, Luz Trail. Anybody in this room knows who that is, French feminist. And she has an essay which is called The Sex Which Is Not One, which she talks about the multiple erogenous zones on women's bodies. And she talks about how women communicate this way. They tell a story, and then they're linear, and then there's some logic, and then there's some association, because they write out of their bodies. And I remember being a young college student, and this just blew my mind. I was like, because sometimes I'd be told in an argument, let's say in a relationship, stick to the point.
Exactly.
But after I read her, I thought, I am sticking to the point. This kind of thinking and association is a way of thinking. And poetically, I'm doing that. And it makes even more sense to me now with this book, because this is a big subject. Climate change, climate destruction of ourselves is a big thing. So it's good to be able to use the form of a poem to do all of that and to see it all in the same realm. The counterbalancing force, I will say, are those couplets, right? The couplets make sense because I'm bouncing between the high desert and Miami in the poem. But the couplets is like a counter force, right? Which is what poetry needs, tension, right? So you've got to have, I learned that from the wonderful Jane Miller, a teacher of mine, a wonderful poet and teacher at the University of Arizona. She said, you always have to be conscious of what's pushing against what you're doing in the poem. The couplets were actually inspired by A.R. Ammons. He had a poem that won the Pulitzer Prize called Garbage in the 90s, maybe earlier, 70s maybe. And I read as many book-length poems as I wrote this as I could get my hands on. And I remembered that poem, and I kept trying to put it in prose poem and all these. I thought maybe this was an essay and not a poem. But I had started in couplets because I was inspired by that poem, that book-length poem, Garbage. And I came back to couplets because of that associative nature of the poem and what's going to kind of rein that into a concise form while the poem is expanding and expanding in terms of this like this body of elements that get at this subject.
Well, it's interesting you say that you've done that in your work before, but I guarantee you that now in the sixth book, you took it to a science. You took that, it's amazing. But also, speaking of the form and the content, because there's always this thought about how does the form connect to the content? How does it create tension? I think you spoke to that. But I think also, going back to the multi-valence, the references and movements, I think that also inspires us to think of interconnectedness in ways that that we don't want to. And I mean by this when we see something that we don't want to see, when we hear something we don't want to hear, because there are terrible things happening in our world. Even the headlines, even from yesterday, we don't have to go that far. We just go to yesterday's headlines, right? And so it's so easy to disconnect. It's so easy to remove ourselves for various reasons, self-preservation or denial or whatever. But I think that the interconnectedness of it tells you that weight that you see, that you can push away, is actually closer to you than you think it is. And therefore, then you have to negotiate with it. You have to try to reconcile with it. You have to reckon with it, right? I think that's what your book is doing.
Well, I think that the reckoning, right, again, there needs to be something else there, because the reckoning it can be dark, right? I mean, I read a lot about what's happening in terms of this subject matter, and it can get you down. So it's not a turning away. It's more like, a kind of leavening, because how can I connect, this worrisome stuff with the children I have an obligation to, with the things that I read about, mice responding to petting, which is always also in the book. You know what I mean? And so there is a way, I think if people just turn away, which you can, because it's hard. So how do we at the same time get people to turn to the subject, turn to it, as well as, having to turn away from the tough stuff? It's always that in the book that's happening, I think. And the counting, in some ways, the counting down is a little scary in this book, but the counting of all of these marvelous creatures and marvelous plants is the counting of them. So again, that's the simultaneous sort of opposing forces happening all throughout the book.
Yeah. I was wondering too, you're opening up so many avenues of, and I also want to be conscious, because I don't know if you wanted to read some more.
I'm happy to.
Yes, read more. You know what? Go ahead and read some more, and then because I could just go on and on. So I want to hear you read.
Okay.
Everybody does.
Let's see. So one thing I will say is there is a kind of architecture or scaffolding in the book, and it is a hike up at the Luz Trail in Albuquerque. It's a hike up to the Sandia crest and down. And so in the poem, that there is a thread that sort of goes that way, that sort of holds the pieces together while they're collaged. So you'll hear part of that, I think, in this section. 21. At the crest, we find a rocky perch to eat sandwiches, share a leftover slice of chocolate cake, anticipate the long bath after the descent, knees ache, therapeutic heat, sheen on Paul's neck and back as I lather and sponge them off, a seam of bathwater between us. Siamese, counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, for all the years and stitchings, our bodies, other bodies intersecting, shoreline, horizon, Alexandra all those years ago, mixing dirt and water in a pie tin, her small hands, giddy street screams, what I made, tipping the slop on Nile's small head. 22. Watching chasing ice, I waver between wonder, grief, urgency. Belag undergoes a fourth surgery, unwraps his swollen knees in the tent, sleeps, descends again into the crevasse, defying doctor's wishes. Ice, aperture, images of water-carved blue almost make me forget his refraying tendons, carbon heat making water flow. How far is the distance between us, me, Rio, Peter, his young assistants? They camp on the precipice, wait, and nearly give up when the glacier starts to quake and crack, ice the size of Manhattan calving into the sea. How old are they? How much does it weigh to be 25 years in the world at this fateful witnessing? 23. The Mishtek believe man committed a grievous fault, precipitating the great deluge. And one afternoon at Hallandale Beach, I went too far out, beyond the buoy, ignoring the lifeguard's shrill whistles with a thrill of defiance, as if no one knew better than me how much my body can do. And I resented whatever boundary that just past high school upstart set, arbitrary, for somebody else. And besides, I felt a strange, exhilarating lightness from collarbone to pelvis, as if some cosmic ether was bottled up miraculously in me, the chosen, yes. And then a thunder under me bumped my left heel. Panicked, I swam frantically back to shore. 24. The descent from 10,300 to 7,000 feet is quicker, hard on the knees and thighs, ache in the neck. In 2 days, extreme drought will close the trail with the Hemes fire, Pecos fire, Black Forest fire ablaze. On the same day, 62 million in the Midwest prepare for a 100-year storm. The same day, orange signs go up along the Bosque Trail. Extreme fire danger, extreme fire danger. The same day, the governor shuts down the Rio Grande watershed in 3 counties. The same afternoon, I cycle south from the biopark along the Bar Canal, where the desert cottontail race me for short distances, where the skunk family crosses, crowds the burrow, disappears, where beavers leave their marks on pointed stumps of trees, where the trail unfolds from small farms to industrial flatland along the concrete diversion channel, where a few wan trees hum see and see. The lone survivor of the Yarnell Hill fire fled his lookout post as the wind whipped the flames, and they suddenly changed direction. The blaze torched his perch, chased the other 19 Granite Mountain hotshots into a valley, the worst place where the only choice was to wriggle into their silver pod-like heat bags and pray as the fire roared through, taking them all. And the one just a short distance away, all he could do, watch. 25. In 2013, 33 young Indo-Pacific bottlenose dolphins washed up dead on the beaches of Gulf St. Vincent. Immunosuppressed by heat stress, they succumbed quickly to the morbillivirus, transmitting it to others in their close-knit pods. And so I force the image, make the girl at the shore turn and unlock herself, climb the sand up and away from the sea to the comfort of porch, socks, yellow kitchen, a ruse, palliation. 26. To the left of the trail, we spot the little nipple cactus, Mammillaria meiacantha, tiny labyrinthine bowl ringed with white flowers. It grows and thrives between rocks, up and through asphalt cracks, with only a few drops of water. Boil the pulp, apply the mush for an earache. On the map, I see we are too far north for this variety, but I think I'm right. Elongated and scarlet fruit, golden anthers, now hot and dry enough at this elevation to take root. The black and yellow Atelopus zetechi, Panamanian golden frog, communicates via semaphore. waving at rivals and prospective mates. Ancient lore held that in death it turned to gold. Even one sighting predicts good fortune. Once saved from extinction by poaching, Zedeki now survives only in captivity. Rising heat in the mountain spurs evaporation, prompts cloud formation, decreases daytime temps, raises nighttime highs, igniting the deadly chytrid fungus, thickening its delicate skin, triggering cardiac arrest. 27. Opiopagon haponicus, also called mondo grass, needs no fertilizer, is rarely affected by disease, adjusts deftly to changes in water conditions. Admired for its tenaciousness, opiopagon now shows signs of decreasing resilience, approaching a threshold at which it cannot survive. Acropora cervicornis, staghorn coral, yields compounds that treat leukemia, tumors, heart disease, and asthma. Vulnerable to bleaching, its population has plummeted 80% over the past 30 years. The International Union for Conservation of Nature has declared its status critically endangered. 28. For 3 consecutive nights, I dream we are stick figures in a giant earth tome, book of mudslides, book of superstorms, book of drought-devastated fields inside which we tumble like the drawings at Poaco, right side up, sideways, flipped. Are we singing? Are we dancing? Are we waving frantically in distress? 29. On simultaneous screens, Kim Suja's needlewoman stands motionless in the throngs of Delhi, Lagos, Tokyo, Shanghai, Mexico City, London, New York, Cairo. Filmed from the back, it's the absolute stillness of her head, shoulders, black braid. Crowds move toward, around, and past. It must take everything to hold her place in the chaos, and I want it. Still, stillness, make it stop. 30. The Selknam believe a long time ago people did not die, but grew so tired of being human, they willed themselves into a long and fitful sleep in which they were transformed into creatures, rocks, clouds, and trees. After many hundred years, they woke to find themselves strange and refreshed.
Thank you so much. You know, 2 things struck me in this selection that you read. One, going back to what you said about the leveling, and something I also admire about the book is the way that knowledge is, there's no hierarchy in the knowledges that you are drawing from. There's a scientific plus mythology, right? Different cultures, different places, different approaches to understanding the world. And they're there side by side. There isn't a kind of privileging of one over the other, which I really appreciated. And you do that also linguistically, you know, with the scientific language, with the language of the animals themselves, you know, their names and their stories. And that's the other thing. The stories were very individual when you talk about specific cases with animals, decimation and death. You know, these are stories that we need to hear, but not just the statistics. And I'll give you an example of how that makes a difference. You know, just a few days ago, or maybe this week, there was that horrible statistic about the number of koalas in Australia.
Oh.
Right? It was like, and we had a number, I think it was something like 25%. And I think that's one way to process that information. But then what if you actually get a narrative that's a little, that allows us to come closer to that event and to that reality, right? And it goes back to what we said earlier, you know, that once you're that close, then you're almost sort of implicated, and your response to that implication says a lot about how you really feel, but also a lot about how we as humans, you know, have to answer, you know, for what's happening right in front of our eyes.
And there's probably anybody here today, if you have plants in your yard or in your neighborhood and you walk there, you are most likely passing a plant that is trying to survive, that is trying to adapt to where you are. Where I am in Albuquerque, it's drought. And so it's almost like, yes, I mean, it's around you. And so the poem, in some ways, the hike is important because on hikes, we commune with, right, with nature. And to think about the individual plants on that hike that you see and their individual stories. And what they're trying to do to just live and survive. And then you have the stories of the children in my book, right? A little bit different, but their little stories. So there's this resonance, I hope, between, living creatures, right? Sort of moving and living in the world, thriving and not thriving. And, it's around us. You can turn away or compartmentalize. It'd be very hard to compartmentalize. You can't compartmentalize in this book. It won't let you. It's just forcing you to jump in the mix. But I think, again, this idea of bringing us closer to things, creatures, ourselves, our loved ones is really at the heart of the book.
You mentioned drought, and I think that that's also a very important element, literally an element in the book is water. We're hearing, I mean, we're seeing definitely, what's happening with all the fires, in areas that didn't have this kind of conflagrations before, now they're there. Also in the Southwest, how water is running out, and that water is going to be the prized commodity within our lifetimes. Can you speak a little bit about, about the presence of water in your book?
Yeah, this book I started in 2012, where I had a visiting position at the University of Miami. Shout out to Mia Leonin, who wrote a blurb for the book, and I met Mia there. And so I went from, New Mexico to Miami, where just water is everywhere in every form. And it was just really, I've been to the ocean, of course, but to live there and to be in a place where, I was just taking all of that in. There's a part that I read at the beginning, about just like breathing it up as like a behemoth around me, this idea of water everywhere. But that just in some ways helped to spark this poem, because I was also taking in a lot of art. I'm very interested in contemporary works of video and performance, as well as every kind of visual art. And of course, I was kind of laser focused on eco art, eco artists. And so all of that just started to converge, and sort of with this vision of the girl that was in my kind of day imagination. I don't know why she came to me. That really kind of sparked the poem. The climate had been an interest of mine for a long time. And so I always did a lot of reading and following the news, but I wasn't writing poetry about it, really. And there was something about that year in Miami. And also, understanding where the water is going, and knowing that Miami, Coral Gables is where the University of Miami is, beautiful homes. And there's a reference earlier in the book to a lecture I went to. It's like a community lecture where we saw these images of how Miami is going to be flooded. And it was so quiet in that room, because I thought all these people whose homes are right next to the ocean had to be thinking, well, my home is going to be subsumed. Yeah. And so being in a place where I could see in sort of real time, not the ocean rising, but everything that I was reading, and then living along the water, it just, helped to make it all seem much more real to me. I was used to drought and the consequences of drought and watching that happen in my home state. But to live in Miami and to look at the beautiful, have water everywhere, to spend so much time in the Everglades as I did, but to also know what was happening to those places at the same moment that I was marveling at them, was really the thing that kicked off this poem in the fall of 2012. And that's why you see a lot of little anecdotes of that time that I lived in Miami. Counting the alligators while I was riding my bike on the Shark Valley Trail. And yeah.
I remember that section with watching this footage of the water spreading out. And it was interesting because in that particular poem, I remember also being struck by, I think you might have made a reference to the outside, if I'm remembering the poem correctly, because it struck me. Is it the leaves or the flora outside was the artifice? There was something about the artifice of the colors of the house as well.
Yes, same
Right?
section.
Right. So I was thinking about that too. I was like, well, there's ways in which that also becomes a not necessarily a cup of denial, but a way that we can sort of distance ourselves from reality. It's like, let's pretend, let's build these oases, which are artificial. Let's continue doing things like in the Southwest, even though everything's drying up, let's continue to make golf courses, which is, that's exactly what, again, we know, and yet we know we're doing it wrong. And yet it continues, right? Ecopoetry.
Yeah, there's a section in there that's the colors of the houses, those beautiful bright colors that are cheerful amnesiacs is the phrase in the book. It's so beautiful you could forget that. And one thing I see Brenda's comment about the Great Lakes, the prediction is mass migration in this country away from the coastlines, away from the Southwest, into the Midwest. So those of you in the Midwest enjoying that beautiful part of the country, if we continue on this course, we will have climate migrants all over the world, but in this country, people will have to move away from the coastlines and away from where we're running out of water, and they have to move somewhere. And so, in the poem, I think later, right, we're looking at 400 million climate migrants, right, somewhere during this century. So let's try to do what we can to stop that. Not that we all shouldn't move to the Midwest, but we don't want to overwhelm you there.
Yeah, I was struck by that, by the fact that you did bring up climate migrants as a phrase, even in the book, because I think that's also another way in which we think that climate migrants is not us. Because we're seeing the devastation in third world nations, right? And that migration is precipitated by the fact that resources are drying up, that lands are drying up, and so people are moving towards what they feel is going to be some sort of salvation, some sort of reprieve from complete, disaster. They find their way to the first world, right, into the U.S. But then, and I think that helps people think, oh well, that's them, that's not us.
Right.
That's their problem, or that's their cross to bear. But the fact is that that's also going to apply to us very soon as well. And that's also another failure of the imagination. That's where we're not as, I believe that's where we're not as, even as a culture, not as active in trying to avoid these things, because they're going to affect us anyway.
And it really is. I mean, I think it's already, I think we may not be aware of it, but it's affecting all of us. I mean, we're seeing it in the hurricanes, right? We're looking at what's happening in Louisiana, right? I mean, the levees held, right, that protected New Orleans, but then the outlying areas really suffered, right? So, and it's like, it's become almost this weird sport that we watch hurricanes in this way, right? I mean, it's happening. The wildfires, I mean, it's just happening now. And I think that, again, it's sort of like watching that with just huge concern. And at the same time, like, does that make us turn away from it, and what will turn us toward it?
Yeah. And also, we're also getting too used to hearing these sort of record-breaking statistics. Oh, we've never had a hurricane of this magnitude at this place ever in 100 years. We're like, oh, okay. But then, next year is around the corner and it's going to get worse. And that's what you hear. And yet somehow, what is it, Valerie? I'm trying to understand this. Why is it that even a year, if they tell us in a year, it's going to be even worse, and yet we're still a little bit complacent? Well, that's a year away.
That's if we're not living there.
Exactly.
My niece, who just had my first grandnephew, was living in New Orleans, and she had to leave. So she was ready to give birth and had all of her doula and the midwives and she had to leave and have the baby in Knoxville. So if we don't feel it, it's probably because we're not in those places. Certainly some people here today may live in those areas or live somewhere where they see it. And so I think that, yeah, I mean, unfortunately we say not until it's at your back door, but it's kind of hard now with the wildfires. That's a lot of geographic space where those fires are happening, where the hurricanes have had their effect. The Northeast also, right, has seen effects from those hurricanes. So I think it's going to, there'll be fewer and fewer people who don't feel it, or see it around them. We're trying to prevent that, right? So I think we don't want to wait till it gets to be the point where, you have to leave your home forever, because you don't, like people in Louisiana right now still don't have power or cell phone service, right? So I think that, yeah, I mean, it's going to be fewer and fewer people that aren't directly affected.
Yeah. Well, we have about 10 minutes left before we'll take questions from people here who are with us. But I want to sort of turn it away from the darkness a little bit and towards the light. And I want to ask you, even though hope is very difficult to hold on to, how is it that you've managed to feel hopeful? Despite, even though you're writing this whole book about war news, are you hopeful? What keeps you hopeful? What brings that hope?
Well, I think the book also, even the ending, right? The ending of this book is sort of telling us, ends with this idea of the incredible beauty that we can generate if we learn to kind of think about the balance, that idea of the master of balance. How do we live? The examples in the late part of the book are by those who've learned how to live with the natural world in balance with it. And so I think that I see the possibility of that, and I understand that we're able to do that. And again, because I do have love for the world and love for people and creatures and plants and stuff. So I try to fill my consciousness with not only like the urgency that I need in order to do what I can, but also to love the planet, and to respect it, and to understand that my respect for it is the thing that helps me change my behaviors. And so I think, again, the book, for those of you that last section was dark, but the end of the book, I think it tries to not in any way say it's all okay, but to remind us in a kind of in a compassionate way how we can do this, how we can live in balance with the natural world.
Because it's still in our hands. The ability to change course is still in our hands. Even though I keep hearing, it could be too late, or next year's gonna be too late. But I think that even as I'm thinking, going back to children, I'm thinking of these images, and not to sort of bring up some darkness here, but the Haitians on the border, right?
Yeah.
The resting image of that, and how that broke open a whole other conversations about who crossed that border, right? And the other thing was seeing children, among in the crowds, right? And I was having a conversation with one of my students about that. Because he felt there's a Haitian population here in New Jersey. So I have Haitian students. And he said to me, it just made me feel a sadness, that's there, that some of these young people who are being who are in the situation now may not have the kind of chance, that I've had. And I said, well, I understand that's absolutely true in so many ways. However, instead of thinking it that way, reframe it into, when I see some of those pictures, I also see a level of courage. Because, right? I mean, that's what it is, because we can look at the negativity of it, but I'm like, you know what? I see a lot of courage. And then I use sort of my own example with my mother crossing the border when she's pregnant with me. 19-year-old woman, hardly know how to read or write, and she crosses the border thinking, I can't give this child anything, but I can give him citizenship. Like, that was her thinking. And I said, so let's hold on to that, the courage that even people came before us had, for us. So I think that we have to honor sacrifice, we have to honor courage, we have to honor these journeys by sort of meeting them at a certain level. Like what is it? And having, and not saying, oh, it's all doomed, it's all lost, because then those sacrifices then will have been for nothing. And we don't want that. And they certainly didn't think that, right? They didn't think that. Go ahead.
It's also the practice we have to learn, because many of them are also fleeing something that has to do with the environment, right? I mean, they're fleeing Haiti not only because of what's happening in the country in terms of politics and government and those things, but because of devastating storms. We're going to have to get used to this movement of people. It's been happening at the border for a long time, but this particular thing, right, the influx is people wanting to go somewhere that's safer in a lot of ways, right, in terms of climate, in terms of politics or government or corruption or violence. And so I think it's a practice for us to have to think about, how do we respond to all of these crises in terms of people moving around and needing a place to go. And I know that the immigration is a complicated, it's a complex issue that we have and that we're faced. But there are reasons why people leave their homes and take these, sometimes deadly journeys to other places, including the US. I mean, we're going to have to figure out how to, as a nation, but as a kind of globe, how we treat people who are fleeing real danger, climate devastation, all of those things. What kind of community do we want to be in terms of helping people, take that courage and live somewhere that's better for them. And it's hard. And maybe this book is the example of, approaching a difficult subject is not going to be a simple formula. There's a lot in this book that tries to take on a lot of the forces that create this crisis. And that's true of any other crisis, political or otherwise. And I think we have to look at all of the forces that make something what it is, and then also approach it that way as well. The problem we have sometimes with, divisive policy in this country is that there's no nuance. There's no nuance about how you approach a complex problem. And a complex problem demands complex solutions, not one solution. And we're not very good right now at allowing more into the discussion about how to approach a problem. And immigration is just one of those. We sort of say, well, it's just like keep them out or let them all in. Well, no, of course not, right? There's many ways to look at it. And if anything, this book is in a different way, sort of a message of let's try to hold all of the complexities and let that lead us to some other way of being in the world.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderfully stated. I love that. Anybody has any questions? Feel free to hear. You want me to read them? Val, you want to read it, or should I read it for you? What is this?
Let's see.
There's a couple of questions here. Brenda has a question here. It says, Valerie, did you do a lot of information gathering before you even started writing the book, or do you gather mostly as you write?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I do both. Obviously, because I was immersed in the issue or the topic, I have a lot of information. But then while I'm writing the poem, I kind of will sometimes know I need a thing. And sometimes I need to go find a book or a newspaper article or do something online. I understand that I need something. So I'm trying to think of an example of that. I think, I knew about a lot of creatures and what they were doing, but I think, I might have 3 creatures in a section, or I know I have to have 4 or something. And so then I'll think, well, what other creature, if I'm talking about a mouse and I'm talking about a grass and I'll think, well, I need something different. I need a sea animal. And I might go while I'm writing, take myself out of the process of writing and find something else. But most of it, most of the works of art I knew about or had experienced. So I don't think I went to seek out anything like that. But yeah, lots of information.
Does this also happen to you though, that sometimes you are, when you're working on a project, you're so attuned to it, that all of a sudden things that you wouldn't have noticed popped up? Like either on whatever venue that they popped up and you realize, oh, okay, there's the relevance to what I'm doing. And then you incorporate that.
I think everything in my life goes into the poem, to be honest. You know what I mean? I said, after I
Yeah.
finish this book, it's like, well, I can put away that chapter of my life because everything that I was thinking, doing, seeing, much of it goes into the book. So yeah, it's like, I don't know, I'm done with that part now.
So
I,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, I see another question. Were you going to read it?
Yes. So you use a lot of scientific language, but also reference performance art and video art, transforming these experiences. How did you navigate the use of other languages, science, art, history, in your poetry?
I don't know. I don't really know. I mean, I just allowed them into this book. That's what's different about this book from Each and Her. There's very different kinds of language in this book. I hope, like I said about music, you know, it's not lyrical, the music in this book, but I hope you can hear there is music and rhythm. Rhythm's very important to me in my work. Sometimes I'll know that a line or a section has to finish in 2 syllables or 2 accented words, 2 words that are accented once or something. You know what I mean? I have this weird, I don't know if it's weird, most poets probably do this thing that happens where I hear the rhythm of the poem and I kind of know how the line has to end. So then I have to find the right word to have that many syllables or that much sound. So I was doing that also with the scientific language, I think. So I'm trying to allow that language in, but I'm trying to also be mindful of the way all of those dialects, so to speak, make, maybe I won't say music, but rhythm in the poem. And I think that's, so I guess navigating for me is with my ear, as well as, you know, the content of the words. So there's plenty of examples that I had that just didn't make it into the poem in some ways because they didn't have the right sound. So that was just a moment by moment, but lots of times I'm sort of flying blind. I'm just like, okay, you know, I'm just writing and picking things out and letting the poem flow and then taking a note, a post-it note from somewhere. So I don't think there's one way to do that. I think it's experiential while you're writing a poem. And for me, because I'm working in the long form, you know, it's a kind of a long experience of that, pulling things together. So it's hard. And I struggled with this poem quite a bit because of that language, because it was different than any other language I was really using in previous books. So it was hard.
Well, I'll give you my critic's perspective, if I may. First of all, you know, I think that the book's successful because we don't see that strain or labor. That's what makes the book flow so nicely, right? But the other thing too is that when I've seen others try to implement a, you know, whether a different diction, you know, into their language, 2 things happen which don't allow it to become a smooth journey. One is that those particular words that are inserted look like insertions and they call too much attention to themselves, right? And with yours, they don't. I mean, they really, I don't think there was a moment where I thought, well, that's a weird kind of placement of this word. Like when you had the phyllis and gene, I can't remember how you say that, right? The phyllis and gene. I thought, well, it made sense. And the second thing is that you did that early enough so that we weren't surprised that, you know, on page, you know, 49 all of a sudden. So it was there from the beginning. So that allows it, right? That allows it to become, this is a language of the book, right? This is the language, the multiple languages of the book. So that's why it flowed, you know. So
well, I'm glad that you say that, because as I read the book, I'm sure for all the poets in the room, you know, after your book is published or you've got something and then you read it and you go, you know, I want to revise that part again. So I thank you for saying that, but there are times when I read the book and I just think, this language, you know what I mean? Like even the section that I just wrote, I was like, that's a lot of Latin and creatures, and it's even darker when I read it. So I thank you for that. But I think, it's just, yeah, I can't, I just did it. I'm just glad that I finished the book and revised it 100 times, and it's okay. I do want to say that I was worried about this book because it was so different. But now that it's out there and I get feedback and I read it, I think, okay, I pulled it off to whatever degree feels like, that I like the book. But it's still almost like another person's book, parts of it. And I think, did I write that? What was I thinking? How did I do that? So it's sort of mysterious. Again, the poets in the room will know when you go so deep in the poem and then you come out of it and you look at what you wrote and you think, where did that come from? And that even happens with me with all the references. There's just moments when I think, oh, there's like the poet Valerie, you know what I mean? Put that together. I don't know where she is, but it was some weird space in there.
Well, we're always our worst critics anyway. So, anyway, there's another craft question here. Let me see, get my glasses. And it's a more general one, but maybe you can give this person something to chew on here. From a craft perspective, what process or tools did you use as you developed and wrote this book?
That's Leanna. Hi, Leanna. Wonderful, wonderful writer. I would say with this book, I probably used everything I've ever learned from every other poet that I've read, or, I had to employ everything. And so, because one thing that I am a little bit accustomed to is this idea of the weaving. I said it's hard, but I kind of know when the stitch has to come up. Like I know I've gone so many sections and the girl has to come up again. And so there's that. That's almost like composition, I'd say, in a way. But in terms of craft, this, everything I know about or want for music or rhythm in the poem, I had to listen for that. Or I had to think about, is the poem sort of, I like spinning out in some ways, but then, right, those elements that he's talking about, tension, opposing forces in the poem, I'm sort of always aware of that, even in terms of a craft. Like, when does it need to move more quickly? When does it need to slow down? And what's the balance of that in the book? And this idea of, as you layer, good poems for me are always layering. I tell people what I love about the language of poetry is that it's the language of indirection. And there are plenty of ways that we communicate directly in this world. It's great. But one reason why we never not want to have poetry is because poetry does it differently. And poetry allows for, I use this example of like light bouncing off the side of a car. We're getting at the thing, but we're doing it sort of in a glinting, bouncing off way. And so in terms of craft, I have to also think about, when am I hitting the nail on the head too hard, right? When do I need to back away? When does it need to be metaphorical? When does it need to be more direct? And this poem has a lot of kind of, I guess, the scientific, I don't know if that's direct language, but kind of. And so I have to think about what's the balance between that kind of diction or dialect or poetic language with the other kinds of it. What's the balance of that? And so that's a craft thing for me. I think everything's a craft thing. But then I think in the end, once the book was sort of put together, then I'm only revising for sound and rhythm and music. I think I do maybe dozens of revisions of the whole thing just for sound. And so that's a lot of reading out loud, reading the poem out loud, reading the sections out loud, reading many of them at once so that you get a sense of how 5 parts together, what the music of that is. So yeah, I think I have to employ almost everything I've learned, and I've had such great teachers and students, and every poet that I've read all have taught me something about the art of writing poetry, and I needed it all for the book.
Yeah, it also seems very miraculous that, as you accumulate all this information, whether it's on the page or on your desk or in your head, and then all of a sudden the book comes down, it's so nice and neat. It's deceptively, it's deceptive.
Yes.
It doesn't tell you the messy journey to get to that. Definitely. We have another question here. Kara Essex say, I'm an undergraduate student interested in ecopoetry and climate fiction. Good for you. Are there any works that helped inspire this book that you would recommend reading? And do you have any other general advice for a young writer interested in this collage poetic format?
Well, I just want to encourage you to write about this in whatever ways you need to write about it. And there is, you probably know this, but there's a great big anthology. It's called the Eco-Poetry Anthology. And I'm not in my husband and I work in different spaces, so we're in my library, but look that up and it has, I don't know, I mean, dozens of writers. It's all poetry, so I can't tell you much about fiction. And you can encounter many, many poets whose work, some of it or much of it revolves around this. And I love anthologies for that reason, is that then you'll fall in love with the writer and then you go and read everything that, he, she, or they writes. But that's a good way. Anthologies, eco-poetry or eco-literature anthologies are good ways to find something that really you love, and then you can read everything. And those are helpful. And again, I mentioned A.R. Ammon's The Garbage, and, I read just as many book-length poems, not about climate, but just book-length poems for me, because then I could see how other writers navigate the long form. So that would be my suggestion. And then just to really encourage you to write what's really important to you and figure out a way to use poetry or fiction or nonfiction, whatever, to do the work.
But in terms of the collage poetic format?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I can't, off the top of my head, I can't say that right now, but yeah.
No, just general, okay. In terms of the fiction though, I would argue that speculative fiction is really speaking a lot of these topics, the dystopian narratives, and so many deal with climate change, the aftermath, apocalyptic narratives have to do with climate change. So that's out there, definitely. Very powerful literature. Okay, let me see.
About Mary Oliver.
Yeah, is Amazing Oliver, of course. Well, absolutely an eco poet.
Yeah, in a very different way. I mean, that's what's wonderful, is that you can have writers, poets in very, very different styles or approaches. But I mean, her approach is definitely that on the level of loving, loving creatures and flora and fauna, and them being wondrous to her, which in some ways, when I say in the poem, trying to blur that separation between me and my creatures, that's something that Mary Oliver tends to admire a lot, but that's some of the same work.
Mm-hmm. I think there's no more questions. I think Mari's gonna step in again, or if not, I will say the goodbye. But Valerie, this is a wonderful experience talking to you. This is such an intelligent book. It's such a beautiful book, and it's such an intelligent book. And I'm so happy that it's part of the Camino del Sol series. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Rigoberto, for being with us today and sharing your time and your love for Valerie's work. And Valerie, thanks for sharing your time with us today too. We really appreciate it. I'm just going to thank my colleagues at the University of Arizona Press, our University of Libraries family. If y'all want to know more about the press, the book, what events we're going to be doing next, please consider going on our website, uapress.arizona.edu, to get more info. And I don't know if you'd be up for this, Valerie, but I would be happy if you were to close out with another poem, another part of the poem.
And sure. And I'm going to put my email in the chat now. So I can go into my library and get some of those books for you, or if you have any questions, anybody, or you want to be in touch with me, please feel free to email me. I'm not always that quick at getting back to you because I'm busy, but I will eventually get back to you. So I think I'll just read from the last sections of the book, and just 3 sections. And thank you everyone for being here so much. Really, it warms my heart, and I'm grateful to you. 41. The Yellowstone believe at one time the people hunted for sport, burned and cleared forest, stopped thinking of animals as their kin. And so Great Spirit let the smoke from their fires sit in the valley. They coughed and choked, but did not abandon their ways. Great Spirit sent thunder and rain, flooding roads and dwellings, inundating the fields. Only then did they turn to Spotted Bear, medicine man, who sent the youngest hunters for buffalo. For weeks they slogged and searched. Along the way, fear forced them to transform their relationship with nature. They returned with the hide of a white bull who had drowned in the floodwaters. Half starved, the people watched as Spotted Bear scraped and stretched the hide for hours and days until it grew the size of the whole of the valley. They lifted it and huddled beneath. Finally, the rain stopped and the sun emerged, shining hour after hour, day after day, shrinking the hide until all that was left was a patch that dissolved into a rainbow arch. And Spotted Bear declared that the people, no longer at odds with the earth, would survive. 42. In 2013, hundreds of Miamians walked and chalked 26 miles of city streets, a high waterline where, by century's end, 3 feet of sea level rise will remake the city into somewhere more like Venice, Jakarta, ancient Alexandria. For over 15,000 years, pilgrims have hiked the circular path beneath Mount Kailash, 52 kilometers, 52,000 meters, 2,047,244 inches, ascending the peak at 21,778 feet is forbidden. Some complete the journey in 25,000 prostrations. At first, each rustle, footfall, birdsong is precise. One can detail their singularities, contours, length. Then a blur comes on, defying separation, until one song rings through the body, mountain, air, and all breath seems one harmonic respiration. Pilgrims believe making the pass at Dol Mala and all the way back will erase the sins of a lifetime. 43. The adolescent goddess Hadanishte was encircled by creatures, thin, delirious, reflected in the tears of her people. She punished the tribe for negligence, put them to work reassembling the fragments of a disintegrating world. After much toil, each piece, cleaned and burnished, flashed a sliver of sunlight by day, moonlight by night, billions of which could not be looked at directly. In this way, they learned to be reverent and disciplined, to live on the edge of great balance, the sum of incalculable beauty. Thank you.